Hi, good afternoon and welcome back. We're going to kick off now with the Technology and Innovation panel. I'm delighted to have a panel of experts who are very experienced from across the continent in various sectors. All the bios are in the brochure, so we're going to try and crack on because it's only a 40-minute session. We'd also like to encourage as much Q&A, so if you can use the app, and they'll give us the questions further on. So we'll have a very quick intro, just your name and where you're from, and then we'll kick off.
I'm Karim. It's complex when you say where I'm from. Actually,
Company.
Okay. So it's an easy one. It's Joko Labs, so innovation hub. But I'm also a member of the Presidential Council for Africa for the President Macron.
Great.
Hi, I'm Robyn. I'm the founder of Cato, and I run Women in Tech South Africa.
My name is Dimitrova. I work for BCG, both in South Africa and here.
Hi, my name is Wale Ayeni. I'm with the IC's Venture Capital Group, and we invest in tech-enabled businesses in Africa.
Great. So, I mean, the president this morning, he opened up and he was talking around the youth and lack of employment. And that there needs to be a need for a broad economy to be built. Is technology the silver bullet that can help build this broad economy? I'm going to throw that one out to whoever wants to take it first.
I mean, it's a lot of people talk about digital Africa and innovation and technology. I think my view, and actually the view of the organization as well, is that technology is really a means to an end. It's about how you use technology to drive services downstream to the mass market, and that's how you actually deliver impact. So there's blockchain, there's AI, there's ML, there's virtual reality, but the most important thing is what are you using these technologies for, and how are you delivering value to the mass market, particularly in Africa? And that, sometimes to us that's more important. It's more about the adoption of the mass market to whatever service you're providing.
Well done, Wale, for being brave.
Can I add to that? I do think we're very lucky with technology. The knowledge about technology is extremely accessible with the internet now, also with open source and open data. So I think, yes, it's a very easy way to educate people. Things are getting cheaper in terms of technology, and I think Africa is also a great place because there's so many issues, real-world issues that can be solved, and technology essentially is there to make our lives easier, streamlined, and technology is an easy way to do it. So I think it's a great adoption for Africa to take on.
Yeah, I think the same. I mean, as it had been said this morning, actually, Africa is facing the development issue when you talk about it, like energy, agric, all the different issues they are facing. If you see it in a disruptive approach, then you can be the solver of the problem of the whole world, actually, because we are in a transition of energy everywhere. We're in transition in how we will feed the world. I mean, the chairman of OCP just talked about it. So Africa can be the land of innovation for the whole world, because there is no matter of this company who already have invested, so they have to get the return on investment before adopting a new technology. So they can leapfrog, actually. So that's what we have seen with M-Pesa, for example, and other technology. So if we get that mindset, if we go in a disruptive mode, and we can be creative and really in a disruptive approach, then we can be a really big change.
Great. So if we look at innovation hubs, so 10 years ago there was maybe a couple of innovation hubs. We've over 440 innovation hubs, according to the GSMA. How sustainable is this model? Because I've seen innovation hubs that are really good, and I've seen innovation hubs that are not so good. So how is this going to be sustainable? Is it sustainable? You run innovation hubs across Africa. How can it work? Because ultimately this is the lifeblood of innovation in Africa, where the great ideas are coming from and need to start.
Well, I think actually we have been one of the first, almost 8 years ago. 1 year before the same hubs in Paris, 1 month. Yeah. So that means also Africa can be at the head of the curve. So is it sustainable? I think this is depending on the hubs. I mean, like, is a company sustainable? So you need to find your model first. Secondly, you have a problem depending on where you implement your hubs because of the economy, simply. The problem I think we are facing is that everybody is seeking for the unicorn. So I want to invest, they come to us, okay, I want to invest in a company. Okay, do you want to invest in us also? That's a problem, you know, because then you have those who are preparing all the ecosystem, working on leveraging the ecosystem and structuring the ecosystem. Actually, they're doing the job for everybody, and nobody is investing in them. So then you have an issue on that.
I think just maybe take a slightly contrarian view to that. It's exactly, is somebody going to invest in the innovation hubs to make them a success? And at what stage does scale matter? Because there are a lot of innovation hubs which actually haven't returned anything and haven't been able to select the talent. And so it's really, really important to weed through which innovation hubs you're going to hang your hat on. Because I think the spirit behind it is wonderful. It's just you really need to focus on who's got the scale, the proximity, the access to talent that can actually make a meaningful impact. And that's where both entrepreneurs will gravitate to, that's where capital will gravitate to, and that's where attention from, you know, kind of customers will gravitate to as well.
But perhaps something we need to keep in mind, if you want to develop an ecosystem, it's a long-term issue. And in that long-term issue, you need to invest. And the problem we have is that, like the corporation or others, they just want to come and say, okay, what can I get now? And it's funny because we are talking about innovation. So we are preparing the future. Like when we talk to Toyota, actually they come and they say, okay, can we think about 30 years after? What is the mobility? Perhaps it's even without any car. You know, that's the interesting way of taking the issue. You know, instead of others, like we have some partner who are banking, but they want a solution for tomorrow. The thing is, you need to really mature, feed and nurture the system. Yeah. So also the startups and others, they can understand. And we have several issues actually we have to deal with. Is the ecosystem, you said, the human capital. So actually the hubs are doing everything. They're structuring it, they nurture the system, they are training, they are giving a space of expression even for the democracy. So there are so many things. Actually, it's become, for me, the interesting thing is that we have a booming expression of a capacity that is there. So how now we take the capacity and we bring them to another level where we can really get a real output that will serve for everybody.
One thing I'll add to that, I mean, the premise that we always hear about innovation hubs in Africa is that, are they sustainable? And the question is that, should they make money? And I think the bigger question is, should innovation hubs actually be sustainable? Because the way I think about it, the one competitive advantage that Africa has is kind of demographics. Africa is the youngest continent right now. There are a lot of young people, and a lot of times the talent and the human capital is not developed appropriately. So innovation hubs in any ecosystem actually helps a lot of people to start that journey to entrepreneurship. And whether the innovation hub itself makes money, it's actually catalytic to a lot of these ecosystems. That's what turbocharges kind of young people to start businesses. So I fundamentally, the principle about should innovation hubs be sustainable is a question that actually governments should actually answer, because if you have a lot of young people in your country, I mean, you should find a way. It's like asking a question, should healthcare be free, should education be free? Because basically what an innovation hub is you're teaching the young people in your country how to become entrepreneurs in a digital system. I think that's necessary. We need to find a way to make sure there are more of them, not less. And that's a conversation that I'm sure you have all the time.
And just maybe to extend that thought, then it's a question of what is the hub linked to? and if they don't have that impetus for profit making, so if it's one of the local dragons or if it's a government, so therefore they're not going to get that pressure for funding ASAP, then you have much more longevity, right? Because the Japanese examples are wonderful, but those guys are known to have a 30 to 50 year view, and therefore it's much more sustainable for them. So it's about isolating those and picking the quote unquote winners.
Great. So Africa has always been a leader in the forefront of technology. Already new innovations using blockchain. If we look at BitPesa, Wale, BitMari, all using blockchain, coming out of Africa before a lot of other innovations happened around the world using remittances using blockchain. How can Africa embrace the likes of AI, blockchain, hardware? Let's start with hardware, because you're quite experienced in the hardware scene.
Yeah, so as mentioned earlier, these things are becoming more and more accessible, but they're becoming more cheaper. And I think the way that Africa can use it is to create solutions for these problems that we're facing locally. And who better to solve them than the people that are actually facing them, because they know the sorts of problems they're facing, they know the solutions they can come up with. And because these are actually real-world problems, so for example, in Cape Town we have a drought. Portugal recently just had a drought too. So Cape Town can create the solution, and they need to create a cheap, sustainable solution, but that can be taken globally because water is a problem globally. So that's just an example, and that's the way I believe it can happen. But yet again, it's with these spaces, like innovation spaces, people need to be educated on how to develop these things. So things like the Arduino, which is a little microcontroller that you connect sensors to, and you can create smart devices. Kids from 6 years old can start programming with these. They're extremely user-friendly, and so that's a very easy way to start getting people to say, like, this isn't scary, it's not hard to use, look at what you can build, now look at what your problems are, and think of solutions and build them, or collaborate as well and work with other people. So I think that's key in terms of using technology, taking it to the next level. And you can also collaborate with people around the world now because of all these great communities that are connected.
I think one more example that's, I think, just become public is actually using blockchain to identify diamonds, right from artisanal diamond mining in Sierra Leone all the way through to kind of shop floor. And that's an innovation that's massive for the continent because you have such a large proportion of mining that isn't the 2 mines in Botswana, but it is the Congo or you know, Sierra Leone and Liberia extracting diamonds. And that tagging of diamonds, that identification that it's ethical, knowing that the diamond on your kind of earlobes or on your finger is ethically sourced, is a massive consumer benefit, but that trickles all the way down to origin, which is one of the big problems that extractive countries have, is saying, how do we reward? And you know, the president spoke about it this morning, about the proportion that the cocoa farmers get versus what we pay for chocolate. It's that concept and that innovation in technology, and it's all bred out of need, because that's already employment that exists, but it's formalizing that employment, ensuring that people are adequately rewarded for the effort that they put in. And that's, I think, the kind of stuff that is getting really exciting now, because the tech is at scale enough to be able to track all the way from Sierra Leone to the cutters, whether in Israel or in Belgium or in Switzerland, you know, to shop floors all around the world.
So, I mean, a lot of the talk really around youth unemployment, and we're talking about employing more people, but on the other hand, we're saying technology is actually going to automate a lot of things. How is it going to work for Africa? If we're building all this great technology that's cutting through actually hiring people, how can the two be balanced?
I mean, the best answer to that is a question that always people ask every 100 years, because a lot of people are scared of technology, but what technology actually does is actually unleash a lot of value. I mean, when electricity came about, all the firewood cutters thought they were going to lose their jobs, and most of them lost their jobs, but electricity created new industries. So there's this inertia, this fear that technology is a bad thing, but what we've seen, at least through the history of humankind, is that it actually unleashes other potential. So yes, some industries are going to be affected. Maybe in the interim, some people are going to lose their jobs, but on the trajectory of the human development, it's something we can't fight, and it's usually a good thing. So.
Yeah, and even maybe on a more shorter-term perspective, the replacement of jobs assumes high industrialization, which lots of the countries on the continent don't have. So therefore, there isn't an immediate replacement. It's rather how do you unlock or reward more or grow something. So I don't think it should be as much of a fear as it's played into be.
we have to reinvent also a new way of doing education. And from the education, when we see we have the future of work is freelancing. The way we go for education is long life learning. So it's also a matter of doing things, solving, getting creativity, learn every day the new technology, because technology is going too fast. So you need to be in those communities, connected locally, adapting locally, connected globally. So you can work with those technology which is accessible because it's open source. It's also cheaper, as we say. That's not meaning simple and without any value. So when we see that, I mean, when we can adapt it, and then also we see that all that network of independent tech hub can take advantage of that, and we can bring the technology and the learning there around communities, then you can have a big hit. There is more and more that movement of being connected and exchanging, and then can leverage and become a place also to exchange technology and knowledge.
So, Wale, you've got a big checkbook. You've spent about $150 million maybe invested in America or in Africa. What's exciting you? Where's IFC putting their money, and why? What are the sectors that are interesting? And
I mean, I like that you said that we have a big checkbook. We actually, in terms of the IFC, the venture team has the smallest checkbook because we write small checks. Yeah. But the venture capital team is all. Yeah. We write minimum ticket sizes of 3 million to about 10 million. We can write up to 25 in tech businesses in Africa. Most of the things we're spending a lot of our time on are around agri-tech. We see a lot of things around agriculture, just because agriculture, I mean, technology has not been applied to agriculture in a long time, not just even in Africa, but globally. So there's a lot of value that we see a lot of startups applying to that sector. We spend a lot of time on e-logistics, supply chain. You're talking about blockchain. I think a lot of times supply chain in Africa is broken, and there's a lot you can do with technology to improve that. And then we spend a lot of time on ed tech as well, just because it's the youngest continent. There's a lot of skills that we can deliver, and Dela is a portfolio company of ours. We're looking at others as well, where you can actually transfer real core skills to Africans, and then they can derive value from those skills on a global basis as well. So this is kind of the three sectors that we've focused a lot on, at least this year. But what I'll say with our group is that we're very tech agnostic. We are also sector agnostic. So basically, we'll look at anything where people are using technology to actually create value, not just for themselves, but for the ecosystem as well. So we're very broad in kind of sectors that we look at. And
for the rest of you, what areas, if you had $1 million, where would you put it in African tech? In whatever sector you think people want to know, where's the interesting sectors for you?
Well, one, maybe it's because I also know it, so I can see the potential is power. So the predictability of power consumption is pretty easy. If you can capture that data and you can predict it, you can actually massively stabilize power supply, and you can then get much more intelligent around it. But that's the tech component of it, is just that access to data and that data collection, and that's much easier to do today, and I know some people are doing it with smart metering in Lagos and piloting in other countries, and then from there, big corporates can then spring and actually put massive amounts of money in the properly directed ways. So that's one I'd like to see how it develops.
Well, I think you have the fintech, you have the power, I mean, you have agri, all those sectors, but never forget that Steve Jobs, at the beginning, nobody wants to give him a penny. So that means, for me, okay, you have your idea, but no expert can tell you this will be the big hit, you know. So for the entrepreneur, believe in your thing and go on. I mean, you see the chairman of OCP, he goes for all those experts, and they tell him, no, don't go for that strategy. He just told us that story, and he took the opposite strategy, and actually it's working now. So, I mean, do your thing.
I think for me, it's It's more sensors and the research or the investment into sensors, because essentially data is the big thing at the end of the day, and that's how you can collect data without having to expect humans to input it. It's very uninvasive technology, and that means it can work in any sector. So if it is agriculture, you're collecting data throughout Africa, throughout the world, on agriculture, different things that are going on, and with that mass data, you can actually collect things. So I guess it's data and sensors collecting this data that I think is great.
But something also that we can with value. What's the choice of the technology we want? We want to get, I mean, we just came through this Facebook issue, you know? So do we want our data to go, or we want the privacy? So that's something also the African policymakers should think about.
And Wale, is there enough deals for IFC? I mean, I speak to VCs in Africa and they say, oh, there's not enough deals. Is it that their focus is too tight, or is there enough deals? They're not just looking hard enough in the tech space?
I mean, I think there's, at least from my view and my vantage point, I think there's actually a lot of tech deals in Africa. I think a lot of times people come to Africa with some set prescription about what their thesis is, instead of listening to what the market is saying. So if you come with a thesis that you want to invest in this particular sector, this is your minimum ticket size, this is exactly who you want to back, maybe you won't find enough deals. But if you're open to saying, okay, what is the market telling me, and what are the entrepreneurs actually doing, then you will see deals. And I think he mentioned it here earlier, is that we back people and we back entrepreneurs. And Africa doesn't lack those. And the good thing about entrepreneurs is that they know what problem most times they're trying to solve. It might not always fit with your thesis, but sometimes as an investor, you just gotta listen and understand exactly where they're trying to go. It might be actually contradictory to your thesis as well. So from our vantage point, we're kind of a Pan-African shop. So we see, and we're not really stuck to one country. So we see enough tech deals. The pipeline is not what's limiting us.
If anyone has any questions, if you can add them to Slido, because we'll get to questions in a little while, so you can ask these guys specifically. This event is all around impact, and there's a common question as to whether African tech ventures need to go international. Should they expand into international markets? I've heard various cases. Agossa from Echo VC, who was here last year, actually said, your strategy should be Nigeria first and Lagos first. Lagos population of bigger than some countries. I've also heard a flip side which says that the population of Côte d'Ivoire is the same size as Delhi. So where would you tell African founders and entrepreneurs to focus on? Should they be just looking at African markets, which they have more understanding of, or do they need to go international for this impact?
I think there is no rule for that. Actually, I have a friend who's the head of Ringe, and he told me they are from Switzerland, and actually he told me there is no small country as Switzerland, you know. So so depends on your product. Depends. It's like Africa. We say it's 54 countries, so it's 54 different contexts, so you can't never say. But the biggest hit we just have in Jocolab, it's just a $2.5 million investment in one company, €1 actually. It was a venture with some European founders and African founders. So, but they are working in Africa. So, I mean, it's totally different depending on your product. Is there a market for you there internationally? If there is not, I mean, perhaps your market is more African, but for sure there is a market in Africa. The thing is, I think for now, people are more copy-paste. So we need to find the local solution for Africa. When the people will find that, and it's not in the fancy places in the capital, perhaps you will find that. So you need to get your hand, on the ground.
The one thing I'll add to that, and it goes as a friend of mine as well, the one thing I'll add to that, though, is that I agree that it depends, but the one advice that we give a lot of founders is that don't be shy to be ambitious and don't be shy to be bold. The fact that you are an African startup doesn't mean that you cannot go conquer Southeast Asia, India, China, wherever you see the opportunity. You're the founder. Figure it out. If it makes sense, then we wouldn't say you shouldn't do it. On the flip side as well is that, man, if your product is solving lack of electricity in Lagos, maybe you don't have a market in San Francisco. That's not the problem there, right? So you need to figure out, A, what your product is, and if it targets if that problem exists in other places, then you can expand to. But technology, it's a good thing that at least it allows you to expand globally faster, as long as your business model makes sense in global markets as well. So we don't prescribe to saying you need to just stay only in Africa if you have a market somewhere else.
Yeah, I think what I've seen a lot is companies from both sides. So like Europe, they're quite scared to get into Africa because it's this unknown continent. But then the same as in Africa, and I mean, I can mainly speak about South Africa, but a lot of companies there are very nervous to go global. And I think a lot of the work that you're doing, Andrew, is great because it connects people and it makes people go like, oh, actually, it's not that scary. I can tap into this market. And I think those are the sorts of things that need to happen, is these gaps are bridged and you have the choice to see like, I can do it and do I want to?
Actually, we start with a program called Bridge Africa. One with the support of Société Générale, so one of the main French banks, and to bring companies from France to the African market. So actually we do a review and we see how they can go to market and try to identify which market is the better for them. We also tried for company coming from Africa to go to France and then to split globally, and also different companies from Africa to come to other country in Africa. So we're trying now to do those cross-border program, and we see that there is really an interest because they don't know each other. Actually, the company from Algeria, they don't know the West African market. The company from Ivory Coast, even sometimes they don't know Senegal. So the market are too small. So sometimes, so you need to go, and sometimes you block in one country, but you can have an open windows in another. So actually, you need to open your opportunity. I mean, the possibilities are huge. So and something else is perhaps that you can have some function of your company in another places. Like you can have a research center in London, another one in Paris, and then you're working in Senegal. So we see more and more that. We have one company, for example, she's based in Senegal. She's addressing the market in Africa, but she have a lot of their technology which is developed in France because they are working with some French university to get more optimization of the algorithm and those kind of things.
Wale, you were going to jump in there?
I was just trying to say, because I used to be in the Bay Area, and the difference between a lot of founders, when you talk about how people think, is that if you see a founder in San Francisco and their first pitch to you, it's a cliche, but the sentence they always start with is, I want to change the world. It's very big, very ambitious. There's nothing wrong with African founders to have big ambition. We fully understand that you need to crawl before you walk, before you fly, but I don't think African founders should limit their ambition. It's good, at least from the venture capital perspective, it's good to have ambition. So.
Do we need government involved in technology, or, if we look at some of the things happened recently, Kenya, last year they came up with a great idea, let's come up with an ICT license and tax anybody who does anything with a laptop. That quickly got slapped down. There's been another attempt to try and tax ICT and tax bloggers in Tanzania, I think it was. And then the flip side is, you look at Rwanda, which has been talked about a lot this morning. We hosted at Africa Tech Summit Kigali this year. I met the minister. He gave me his WhatsApp number. You call me. Tell us what you need. Unbelievably transparent and trying to get people to do things. What can government do? How can we get them involved? From your experience, and I mean you've worked with them across a number of countries, how can they drive tech and innovation forward? Karim?
Well, I think it's first an enabling environment. I mean, like Ghana, I think just announced that they will avoid taxes for 3 years for the tech companies, which is what we are doing advocacy for years. I mean, in Senegal and other countries. So, like in France, I invest in company, and you have for 5 years you have this young, innovative company, and you have a lot of facilities with taxis and everything. So, I mean, when you start and you don't have that bullet on your feet, you know, you can fly. But if you're blocked and you just have problem, and why you go formal? You have a problem, and then you need to find the finance. You need to find your customer. I mean, it's just crazy. So how the government can help on that? That's an enabling. Instead of not doing things, not blocking, you know, that's the first thing, and then it's investing also, because as we say, the tech hub actually they are doing the job of the government to give a place where entrepreneurs can flourish. That's supposed to be the job of the government. So there's so many things to do, but those two can be a good start.
And maybe if I can just add one more, because I wholeheartedly agree, but it's around labor legislation. And not all countries on the continent have the challenge, but some have it very pronounced. If your labor legislation is super impeding towards people being hired, retained, or the longevity behind retaining someone is predetermined on day one and you have no probationary periods and so on, then entrepreneurs get scared to bring people on board full time, and therefore you've got skills kind of not being attached to the right startups, and that's, I think that's pretty important, which is also why you may see people start to reach into hubs in Paris or and so on, because freelancing is just much, much easier.
I work for DFI, so I'll pass on that question and say all governments are great. But to answer your question, I think a lot of times governments have the right heart. They're coming from the right place. And sometimes it's just understanding how to be more effective than not. Because when you talk to the presidents and the leaders, they understand that Africa is young. They understand that technology there's an advantage there. Is that what can government actively do? My view is that governments are quite effective from the policy side of things and also kind of from the infrastructure side of things. My thing, particularly with African governments and as it relates to venture capital, is that people always complain that there's no money in Africa. But there's a lot of pension funds in Africa that have a lot of money. And in Africa, most of the pension funds only invest mostly in fixed income. They don't invest in alternative assets, which is private equity and venture capital. And in my experience, I've never seen a venture capital asset take hold in any ecosystem without the participation of local money. In 1978 in the United States, there was pension reform. And the reason why we have a thriving venture capital business in the US is because most of the pension funds invested in that asset class. And I think governments in Africa, given that the continent is so young, instead of just investing in fixed income, which means you're just financing present-day government should invest in the future, which is the youth. And I think there's room for pension reform all across Africa to channel some of that local money more into riskier asset class, that is venture capital. I think that will be, very beneficial, because sometimes talk is cheap. You know, everybody talks about digital innovation, but money needs to support these young people, and it can't all come from the outside. I think in Africa, governments can do their part in financing the asset class as well.
Is the question, though, that African technology needs a big exit? Do you think we need an exit that suddenly wakes everybody up that isn't already interested in African tech, who's going to suddenly get on a plane to Lagos or Nairobi?
I used to think that, but yes, an exit always helps. It attracts more talent. But sometimes Africa also has some PR issues as well. People talk about there's no tech exits in Africa, but that's actually not true. The biggest tech exit in Africa happened December last year. It was in South Africa. A tech company listed on the South Africa Stock Exchange raised $300 million, was valued at $1.6 billion, and nobody in the tech ecosystem knows that that happened. So, I mean, that's an example of an exit that happened, but because of this information arbitrage, you know, people didn't realize that. So, and I think what we're seeing on the continent right now is the exits are not like in the US, but over the last 3 years, African tech companies can actually have been able to list in their local countries, and they've also been able to list internationally as well. MyBox listed in Germany. There's a few companies from Nigeria that are about to list in the in London. So I mean, that conversation about exits, and they're actually American companies as well that are buying African companies. Get Smarter is a tech company in Africa that got bought for about $120 million. So that trajectory is changing. So that's what I'm saying. It's already happening.
So it's more trade sales and stuff under the radar. Yeah. We might go to some questions. Do we have any questions? I think we've got Slido. And then if we've not, we can maybe get some microphones as well. Do we have a spare mic? Yeah.
My name is Dauda Bari. I'm the CEO of Adama Robotics. I have kind of 3 questions, but they are short. First one is, in terms of tech apps, where do they get funding from in Africa? How can we make them sustainable in long term? And then when are we going to see an African unicorn? Thank you.
Well, I think we covered the tech hubs. African unicorn, do they exist?
South Africa definitely has a few. I mean, Get Smarter, that's one. There's one which you may not know, but it's called LifeQ. So they're now invested, a San Francisco company invested in them. They're all over, like, I think they're almost on every continent. They have invested in, they basically do the research on all the sensors that are in smartwatches, so that at some point they'll be releasing it that you can tell, like, if you're diabetic, if you're gonna have like a diabetic seizure or whatever they're called, just from sensors on there. So, I mean, that's a huge company that's done amazing things. They're more, but I'll stop.
Just about the unicorn question, I actually don't believe in unicorns at all. I mean, there's all this PR about unicorns and unicorns and unicorns. It doesn't really mean anything, because ultimately the goal is not to create a unicorn. The goal is to invest in companies that can provide value and are sustainable in the long run. If you're successful at doing that, you'll create value, you'll get there eventually. So we don't really chase people that chase valuation, because valuation can be fleeting. You can be a paper unicorn, it doesn't really mean anything, you can still lose your money after that. So we focus on entrepreneurs that say, okay, I see an opportunity in the market, I can create value, I can scale it, and that is more sustainable. I think we don't, it's good when some of our portfolio becomes a unicorn, but we don't really focus on that too much.
Yeah, and maybe just from a pure development standpoint, it's much more important to have the ecosystem where a single company can, thank you. From a development standpoint, it's much more important to have an ecosystem for where you can springboard some kind of, whether it's large exits or other examples that are global, but actually, I think for the continent in general, it's much better to ensure that these guys have places to thrive, share skills, and exchange.
I'll go for, there's one question here, and then I'll take your question in the back once we do this one. What role do you think technologies play in solving basic issues like sanitation and waste disposal? Is there enough work being done in these areas? Karim?
Yes, there are. I mean, during the COP22 in Marrakesh, I mean, we used to run a lot of startups who came with a solution for the waste management, for several type of their company who are using mobile apps to go for the waste management and things. So there's a lot of things running. Actually, people don't know. Perhaps this is the peer issue we are talking about.
The one thing I agree with you, Karim, particularly you actually earlier than we will do is that if you actually spend time in Africa and talk to all the young people in technology, they're doing a lot of interesting, incredible things across all sectors. Helping them scale is the challenging part, but tackling all problems that we can come up with, they're young people trying to use technology to solve it. And Karim will know much more than I do, but you see most of it.
Okay, question in the back.
We know that the fundamental problem in Africa is the cost of capital and the access to capital, right? That's the elephant in the room. What are you developing new models? Because the VC model, as we see it today, does not work for Africans. If you're raising money in dollars and you have to go to Naira, devaluation the next morning, your revenue, it just doesn't match up. And this is something that has been done at the government level to take out some of the countries from this situation, which was supported by the likes of yourself. What are you doing specifically to address this mismatch in Africa, especially in the tech space?
That's a good question, because you're right. I mean, the access to capital in Africa has, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in that realm. In the VC space, it's kind of a unique asset class, so you need to really think about how you structure deals and how you're thoughtful about investing. But to answer your question directly, I mean, I'll come back to the one point that I mentioned. You mentioned about dollars investing in Africa. I think there has to be, and I keep saying this, there has to be local participation from an investment perspective. Because when there's local participation, then the models can start to shift, because now you see, okay, how are the people that have billions in Naira, how are they investing, and how are they getting their money back? That's important. Like in China, there's local participation. In the US, there's local participation. So for the investment model to change in Africa, there has to be some sort of local participation. That's one. The other thing that you mentioned about FX issues and all of that, we have instruments that as the IFC, can allow us to, instead of loan in dollars, we can loan in Naira. So basically, IFC as a global institution can issue bonds in local countries. That's Nigeria, Kenya. So I think my colleague from Treasury was around. And then they can actually issue kind of the debt in the local currency so that you avoid FX issues as well. The challenging thing with that, though, is that all those instruments are typically more important when you're a big company, right? So when you're an early stage company, nobody's going to kind of do a swap deal with you because A, you're already risky from the, I mean, the FX is the list of your concerns, right? But what I do see is that it's slowly going to change. It's the good thing with venture capital is that we actually start with a blank sheet of paper in Africa, so we actually structure deals that make sense. What I do see challenging is kind of the earlier space. So if you're going to invest 100K, 200K, 300K, what model will work in Africa? How do you structure those? That's kind of a work in progress that we have. But yeah.
Okay, there's a question here which I think segues back to the innovation hubs. How would you advise private sector companies with problems to solve to connect with local entrepreneurs who can solve them? Business opportunity there.
Yeah, actually, we already do it. I mean, some corporate came. The only thing with us in our network is we want to be carry for the startups. I mean, don't just come and grab your idea and you run. You know, you have a lot of corporate. Unfortunately, they are doing this, but more and more there's. I mean, it's also a new model, and the corporate are coming and learning about working with the startups, and especially those in Africa and the tech hubs. So it's something new, but I see it's improving now.
That's actually a huge thing that my company focuses on. So we run a whole bunch of tech communities in South Africa, and our network is about 18,000 engineers and people that are working in technology around South Africa. So when we work with corporates, though we do product development or hardware development, we tend to advise the corporates to crowdsource. And crowdsourcing means running hackathons where they can come up with solutions, anything from 20 solutions to 300 solutions within one hackathon sitting, which ends up being those amount of companies that they can end up investing in. So that is a way crowdsourcing.
So the answer is come and meet these two after and get their business cards. We've been given 5 minutes to go. Has anybody got some burning questions that they want to ask? Yeah, lady there, yeah. Raise your hand as well if you want a question before we wrap up. Yeah, go ahead.
The question is around the innovation hubs. If you have a government that is actually funding an innovation hub, they'll lose the motivation to actually find projects that will be commercially viable, potentially.
The basis there is not the advocacy that governments set up these hubs, because I think it's pretty clear that they don't necessarily have the skill set or abilities to or know-how, and honestly, it would be small peanuts for the things they have to focus on. It's more about how do they back founders and innovation hubs like some of the ones represented on the panel today and give those guys a platform and alleviate them a little bit from fundraising so they're not spending their whole time running around trying to raise funds or make themselves sustainable. So it's just a cooperative model or a co-funding model that is what we were advocating for earlier. Actually,
we're working on a project we launched at the end of the month with the French Corporation to have a platform that will also come with some capacity for the hubs to learn how to run the hubs, to give them also facilities for running the hub, for managing of funding and for their members, and much more. Actually, if you're coming to Vivatech, you will see it's the tech conference in Paris at the end of the month. You can be part of it.
Anybody else got, yeah, man here. We got 1 minute, so you got to be quick.
Can you hear me? Yep. This question is primarily around data. Most startups come about access to reams of data, but in Africa, getting access to data, analyzing it, and coming up with
you're going to have to give us the question really quick because they got 1 minute to show me here.
Okay, sure. How do you guys negotiate the topic of getting access to good quality data in Africa?
You do it yourself. You collect it. There's plenty of data because you also have a population that is generally somewhat aware and has access to some of that. You collect it yourself, and it's actually, to be honest, can be much more reliable than what you think, whether it's companies or other startups in North America or Europe would have, just because of the recency with which it was generated and the non-legacy systems in which it's held.
They also, just to shove it in quickly, there are some initiatives that are encouraging governments to make their data open. So that's happening more and more, and that is like their main job. They work with all governments around the world trying to do that.
And just to add to that, I think from a tech perspective, it's actually easier to collect data in Africa than it is in Europe. So, I mean, there's a lot of regulation here that makes it so hard to get data, but in Africa, I mean, you can get data if you want it. So.
Great, well, we're going to have to wrap up here. I'd like to thank the panel, if you can give them a round of applause. And just to say, if you want to hear any more about African Tech, shameless plug, but we're partners with LBS. We've got Africa Tech Summit London on Wednesday this week, where these esteemed people will also be joining the panel. So thank you. Bye-bye.